Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Alliance's first ever virtual career development workshop. I am Dr. Medeva Gee, the Executive Director of the Leadership Alliance and Associate Professor of the Practice of Behavioral and Social Sciences at Brown University. The Leadership Alliance is a national partnership of more than 30 institutions of higher education. And so when the opportunity to meet in person and to have this workshop in person was no longer an option, our colleagues at Johns Hopkins University, one of the founding members of the Leadership Alliance, stepped in and worked collaboratively with the executive office team to co-sponsor this event, and I am grateful for their support. So to bring greetings on behalf of the Johns Hopkins community is Dr. Nancy Koss, Vice Provost for Graduate and Professional Education. Dr. Koss?
Thank you so much for Dr. Gee for welcoming me, and to you and to certainly my own colleagues at Hopkins for organizing this. We're all living in the same reality right now, and so many things are so much harder and obviously are truly catastrophic for so many Americans right now. One of the opportunities we do have is being able to work with so many more people and so many of you through a workshop like this when it does go virtual. So I'm pleased to be able to be one of the people welcoming you on behalf of the Johns Hopkins side of this partnership. We have appreciated the partnership with the Leadership Alliance from the beginning. We're pleased to be able to share resources through our own professional development colleagues. As Dr. Gee said, my portfolio in the Provost's office at Johns Hopkins is graduate education. While I've been on the faculty at Johns Hopkins for really most of my adult life, I've been thinking much more intensively about what is important for PhD students and for postdocs during the last 3 years while I've been spending this concentrated time in the Provost's office. And while there are many, many things that are relevant to the well-being and future success of our PhD students and postdocs, I would say that the themes that are emerging over and over and over again are good quality mentoring and the ability to engage around professional development. And quite honestly, the two are so intertwined because a good mentor makes sure that PhD students and postdocs have the ability to engage. So what does engaging in professional development mean? I don't know, and you're going to hear a lot more today, but there are a few things that occur to me. One is the ability to explore. I think sometimes PhD students who get more and more specialized in their scholarship forget that the world, the things that they can do with that expertise is really so vast. And the more people you as PhD students and postdocs can talk to who are doing really different things with their own PhDs in your fields or related fields, the more helpful I think it is, just knowing that people are doing that thing or that thing. So exploring, listening, and then ultimately, particularly when our world changes back a little bit, trying things, the ability to try something through an internship, through a few weeks somewhere, through a summer somewhere. There's nothing like trying something to get a sense about whether you like it, whether it's fun, whether that's what turns your brain on. So I just wanted to add those comments myself. And mostly I'll get back to saying welcome. I hope it's a great day. I know that it will be. Thank you to my Hopkins colleagues who are putting in this extra time on a Saturday. And thank you to the Leadership Alliance for the partnership and for including us.
Thank you, Dr. Koss, for your meaningful, thoughtful comments and for your continued support of the Leadership Alliance. We really appreciate it. The mission of the Leadership Alliance is to develop underrepresented students into outstanding leaders and role models in all career sectors, in academia, the public, and the private sectors. We are an alliance to develop leaders, and we are an alliance positioned to lead even in the wake of a global pandemic and a national cultural crisis. So staying true to our mission, we decided to press on and transition this workshop to a virtual platform because now more than ever, it is essential for us to come together, to support each other, and to continue our work of preparing the next generation of diverse scientists and the transformative impact they will have wherever they go. So with that in mind, The goal of this workshop is to increase the readiness and competitiveness of scientists from diverse backgrounds as they train for and enter careers in academia and the broader biomedical research workforce. And this workshop is sponsored and supported by a grant from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, specifically the Division of Training, Workforce Development, and Diversity. So as I mentioned earlier, in a very short period of time, we worked hard to design an inclusive, supportive, and engaging virtual experience. This was a collaborative effort, and I would like to acknowledge and thank the planning committee members from Johns Hopkins University, so Dr. Kate Bradford, Dr. Damani Piggott, who is a Leadership Alliance alum, and Dr. Patricia Phelps. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my team, the Leadership Alliance Executive Office staff, the media services teams at Brown and Johns Hopkins Universities, and all of our workshop leaders and all of our speakers. We have for you, I think, a really great day of professional development. And so at this time, I would like to walk you through the agenda. And so, as you will see, we're going to get started with such an inspirational conversation with our keynote speaker, Dr. Corbett. And there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions using the Q&A after her presentation. Ms. Ernestine Baker will be introducing her. So we will take a little break after the morning plenary keynote, and then we will come back in the afternoon from about 1 to 2:15 with afternoon workshops. And we want to thank and acknowledge again our colleagues from Johns Hopkins University for organizing these workshops. We're able to leverage their very important resources. We hope that you're able to take advantage of them. Many of the sessions will be recorded, and this is indicated in the agenda. And so we're going to wrap this up by hearing additional stories from alumni of the Leadership Alliance. You know, with the Leadership Alliance, because our mission is to develop leaders and role models, this requires a continuity of mentorship to produce a legacy of scholars. And so our mentoring starts with the National Summer Research Early Identification Program. And the alumni who will be presenting this afternoon actually participated in the undergraduate summer research program. And we continue tracking and mentoring them throughout their entire academic pathway as they are now diversifying the research workforce in academia, the public, and the private sectors. So we're really excited to have this session moderated by one of our alums, so Dr. Damani Piggott. And so it's going to be a wonderful conversation with alumni in these various career sectors, so you can have a better understanding of the types of careers you can have with a PhD in the biomedical research workforce. So we'll have a panel, and then we will be able to break out into 3 groups, 3 breakout rooms, so you can have a more granular conversation with each of the alums, depending on the career sector that you're interested in exploring. But wait, there's more, because even after the workshop ends, we have these wonderful resources, these resource links that are provided to you so you can continue your professional development journey through those resources. And as indicated on the agenda, you know, virtual networking is available to you through our social media platforms and on leadershipallianceconnect.org. That's our online mentoring and networking site, where in addition to networking with other scholars, you'll also find job opportunities and funding opportunities and programmatic opportunities that are being offered by the broader Leadership Alliance network. So we hope that by the end of the day, you will be inspired by our speakers, challenged by a diverse array of breakout sessions to support your professional development and, as importantly, your personal well-being, and transformed with concrete strategies that will help you navigate your academic and career journeys. We thank you all for joining us as we celebrate our collective resilience and commitment to our mission, the Leadership Alliance's mission of preparing a diverse research workforce. And now, to start the program, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to present to you Ms. Ernestine Baker, who's the Executive Director of the Meyerhoff Scholars Program Emerita at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, who will now introduce our keynote speaker. Mrs. Baker.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Corbett. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett is the scientific lead to the coronavirus vaccine and immunopathogenesis team at the National Institutes of Health in the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Vaccine Research Center, VRC. Appointed to the VRC in 2014, her work focuses on developing novel coronavirus vaccines, including mRNA-1273, a candidate vaccine against the virus that causes COVID-19. In response to the ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic, the vaccine concept incorporated in mRNA-1273 was designed by Dr. Corbett's team from viral sequence and rapidly deployed to the industry partner Moderna Incorporation for the FDA approved phase 1 clinical trial. The clinical trial included 45 participants, started only 66 days from the release date of the virus sequence. Following promising results in animal models and human, mRNA-1273 is currently in phase 2 clinical trial, with a trajectory to begin phase 3 efficacy trial by the end of July. The goal is to vaccinate healthcare workers for emergency use by September in the predicted onset of COVID-19's next seasonal wave. Alongside mRNA-1273, Dr. Corbett's team boasts a portfolio which also includes universal coronavirus vaccine candidates and novel therapeutic antibodies. Additionally, Dr. Corbett spent several years working on a universal influenza vaccine, which is slated for phase 1 clinical trial in the upcoming year. She has 15 years of expertise with the dengue virus, respiratory syncytial virus, influenza virus, and coronaviruses. Her scientific career began at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, where she was a Meyerhoff Scholar and one of our first NIH undergraduate scholars. She received a BS in Biological Sciences with a secondary major in sociology in 2008. She then enrolled at the University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill, from where she obtained her PhD in microbiology and immunology in 2014. On a more personal note, I was first introduced to Dr. Corbett by someone connected with her high school. She is a marvelous example of what is possible when students are provided opportunities, resources, mentoring, and a consistency in expecting high academic excellence. Dr. Corbett is smart, high energy, she's hardworking, compassionate, fun-loving, determined, and is led by her strong faith, and very stylish. And if her current job doesn't work out, watch out, New York, and its fashion industry. Like a proud mother, I am so thrilled and excited to introduce my own, like my daughter, Dr. Corbett. Good morning.
Good morning, Mrs. Baker.
It's so great seeing you.
So nice to see you. You know, this is a pleasure, mostly because I was invited to give this keynote by Mrs. Baker, who, as you can tell based on her introduction, I have known for quite some time. I met her when I consider myself to have been a scientific baby, so to speak. And, you know, it's a pleasure to be in this moment and to be recognized for my contributions, but to also have people who really understand what my story is and tell it in that way. And, you know, that's part of what I am going to talk about today in this keynote, because I am currently living in a moment where I'm having my story told, whether it be by journalists or bloggers. You know, people are reaching out about books and films and TV shows and reality shows and critics even. And what I had to learn kind of on the onset of what is happening right now with my life and essentially with my story is that the only person who can really tell it the way that I want it to be heard is myself. And it's interesting because when I was briefed, and that word kind of takes even a very different meaning these days for me, because I'm briefed every morning at 8 a.m. about coronavirus. I am briefing leaders in the field, leaders of the world in infectious diseases, the President of the United States. And so that word takes a different meaning, but we all know what happens before these Zoom calls is that it comes together because the presenters are giving a heads up on what's going to go down. And so I got that heads up. I don't know, I guess it was Thursday or so. And one of the things that was told to me about the Leadership Alliance is that we like to do storytelling. And I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. Because I've been having my story told for the last few months in various ways, but also having to reflect on its plot from my own view, and really having to grasp the concept that my story is mine. And initially it was very odd for me. You know, I knew where I was coming from. I knew where I thought I was going. I knew the story behind the vaccine concept. I knew all of these things, but to have other people interested was different for me. And, you know, humbly speaking, I was proud to have people interested in my story, but also somewhat confused about why. You know, my life is not a novel that people pick up off the bookshelf. You know, it actually, in my opinion, is not even for consumption. I don't think anyone should be, unless that's how you decide. But I really came into this moment because of my plot and who I decided I was going to be, who I decided were going to be the characters in my story, and how I felt I wanted it to end. And so that's the address that I'm going to give to you all today, is that your story is yours to tell. And it's interesting because I posted this Instagram post. Actually, Dr. Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, wrote a blog, and it featured this photograph of me briefing the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And this picture was taken about 6 weeks ago. And I captioned it, "If you don't tell your own story, someone else will." And that caption comes from a place where 6 weeks ago, I was asked by my boss, who is genuinely understanding. You know, the White House Coronavirus Task Force wants to come and they want to hear the story of our new antibody. So people know, it's all over the news, right? The team for which I'm the scientific lead at the National Institutes of Health Vaccine Research Center is the team that designed the vaccine concept that is moving forward into phase 3 clinical trials by the end of next week. You know, it is the vaccine concepts that is incorporated into several of the leading coronavirus vaccine concepts. But also on the aside, during all of the things that were happening 6 weeks ago about an antibody that we discovered also went into first in human clinical trial. And it was the first antibody, which is a therapy, as you guys probably understand, to go into human clinical trial in collaboration with Eli Lilly and a small biotech company called Accelera in Canada. And so here I am living in this moment that is a high, some would say a climax, right? And I am being asked, do you want to tell the story of the antibody to the White House Coronavirus Task Force on this day, you know, whatever? And my reply to that email, from which this caption on this Instagram post comes, was, if I don't tell the story, who's going to tell it? I didn't know why it was even a question. And what I'm realizing is that someone else will tell the story. The story has to be told. If someone is asking for the story will be told. So you have to decide that no matter the audience, no matter the moment, I can take everybody back to about 6 weeks ago when a brother of my Hugh was murdered by a police officer. So I was not in the mood. As high of a moment as it was for my life, it was a low for my people. But if I didn't stand up and tell my story, then who would? And so it was the beginning of the first phase of reopening after we'd all been quarantined and cramped inside of our homes for, I don't know, what was it, 3 months or 4 months? It was the first time I got my hair pressed. I generally, as Mrs. Baker said, I generally like to dress, but for 4 months, I hadn't necessarily put on, you know, real clothes, so to speak. I might throw in a button up for a briefing, whatever. But I pulled out my grandmother's Chanel vintage suit. I went and got my hair pressed, and I told my story because if you can see from this picture, if I didn't, who would? Probably the person who knows me most in this picture is the man who's standing beside me, who is a longtime mentor. As Mrs. Baker said, I am a product of both the Meyerhoff Scholarship Program, but also the National Institutes of Health Undergraduate Scholarship Program, for which I spent 3 years with funding from the NIH in undergrad. And for that reason, was able to be in a laboratory at the NIH every single summer for undergrad. And then also for 3 years at whichever point in my career I decided. And this man standing beside me is Dr. Barney Graham, who is my longtime mentor, because I was in his lab when I was a scientific baby, as I like to say, and really trained me up. So he knows my story. He has been through the trenches, so to speak, with me. But even he, I feel, even though probably one of the best to tell it, wouldn't be good enough. And so that brings me to the point of, you know, you think you're just living life. You think you are, this is how life goes. There is a beginning, there is a middle, there is an end, and along the way, there are things that happen in your plot that sometimes you can only speak to. There are things that happen in your plot that sometimes you only want to speak to, or you don't, right? And I took this this picture or diagram on how to tell a story from Google last night. And there's so many of these diagrams, right? They all essentially say the same thing. A story has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Funny enough, they all have this triangular shape where, you know, there's a beginning, there's a straight line, then there's the rising action, it goes up to a climax, it comes down, and then there's an end. What does that even mean? What does it even mean to the reader? What does it even mean to the writer? What does it even mean to the storyteller? How do you fit, you know, 80 years of a life into this triangle? And how do you decide how to speak about it? And how do you decide which parts of what do you leave out? Which parts of what are serious enough to be left in, or good enough and exciting enough to be left in? And that's kind of how all of what's happening right now with me is panning out. So I know what my beginning is. I don't even, you know, maybe this is the climax of my life, but I don't know. I'm 34 years old. I am only the scientific lead of this team. So yes, is the vaccine concept mine? Yes. But also, I'm not a principal investigator yet. To me, I am still in the part of the story where it is not even the middle. I am still in the part of the story where it is still rising action. I am still in the part of the story where I'm collecting characters. You know, before this pandemic, I'm fresh out of relationship, so I'm dating, collecting characters. I am, you know, still meeting some of the people who are going to be in my life forever or not. I am still learning who I am and who I am to be. I am still essentially writing my story, but people are asking me to tell it. And I, you know, the types of questions that I get when people, whether it be the New York Times, BET News, Black Enterprise, Essence Magazine, whatever, when they're asking me all these questions, they want me to dig deep. They want me to tell them, what books do I read? Manuscripts, PubMed.gov. What are my favorites? You know, what type of music do I listen to? All of these things that I'm even still figuring out, and someone else wants to hear about it. And so I guess what I wanted to do with this session is to tell you the story from my point of view, to give you insight on how you could possibly write your story if you come into a moment, and you will, where someone wants to hear it. And, you know, I get a lot of messages from women online who say, oh my God, like, I'm just like this or that. And I'm so proud, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, is that this or that what you see your purpose being? Because if it's your purpose, then it's important. And if it's your purpose and you bask in it, then it's going to be someone else's read later. And, you know, we all come to science for very different reasons. We're inquisitive. We like to ask questions. We appreciate the unknowns for whatever that's worth. We want to figure out some small part or piece of nature that no one else has figured out before. And we're quote unquote smart, they say. And so I like to start my story with why I chose science. Because before this moment, I didn't even know that it was a little bit different than why other people choose science. So Mrs. Baker said something. She said she was introduced to me early in my life by someone, you know, from North Carolina. I'm assuming it's someone from a program called Project Seed. Project Seed is a program for high school students who take some interest in science on some level, exposes those high school students to the laboratory, and helps them to understand what the day-to-day life of a scientist is like in high school. So I am Kizzmekia Corbett, and I became a scientist when I was 16. I start my story that way because that's actually when I realized that I was a scientist. Was I designing vaccines when I was 16? No. I don't even, actually, you know what? To this day, I do not even remember what I was doing. All I knew is that I was in a place where I'd found a thing that I liked. I was being mentored by a Black man from Alabama in a laboratory at the University of North Carolina, in a chemistry laboratory, one of the top chemistry programs in the country. In fact, I didn't know it then, but the principal investigator of that laboratory is a world-renowned organic chemist. He is a beast, apparently. And here I was in this laboratory as a 16-year-old, beginning my story. And people say, well, how did you know? And I say, it was all because I saw someone who was a scientist, who looked like me, representation, and essentially believed that I could be just like them. And I knew what my personality was. So the scientist's day-to-day lifestyle fit my personality. I like to come and go as I please. Ms. Baker could also, in all of the glory of her introduction, she could also tell you that I walked into Meyerhoff Summer Bridge and I, was headstrong, and I grew up in a household where I was allowed to have a voice, which I tell my parents now, like, my voice is also landing me on Fox News, but whatever, with critics. But I was in this program called Summer Bridge Program for Meyerhoff, and we were studying for an exam in the wee hours of the morning. And I remember just standing up and just saying, can we wrap this up? Like, it's either we're gonna pass or fail. Can we just wrap this up? And that's how I've always been. And so science gave my personality a voice, so to speak. I got to discover things. I got to be the first one to do it. And I got to be the first person to tell the world about it, whether, that's essentially what writing a manuscript is. And so I was beginning to understand what my setting was, who I felt like I was going to become, a scientist in a laboratory. And I was starting to own the pieces of my beginning. And I read some of the profiles about me online where, anyone can write a profile about you. And while communication to me have to go through the National Institutes of Health Communications office, a journalist can get denied communication with me and then go talk to anyone who's ever met me ever and ask about my story. And I read a lot of those stories, and they all start out with, it's a teacher from elementary school, and she tells about how I was like this smart and I was always helping kids and blah, 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 blah. But you're allowed to define where your beginning is. And for me, it's the moment where something just snapped and clicked into place and told me, you are supposed to be a scientist. You are supposed to discover things. And you are supposed to use the things that you discover to help the world. And interestingly enough, when I was in this laboratory at UNC at 16, this lab was working on how to design drugs for whatever diseases that had less side effects. And so it was a problem that was broad. It was something that would essentially end up helping the world. I mean, he really kind of revolutionized organic ways to separate out chemical enantiomers, or, you know, mirror images of each other. We all can go back to those days. And it was, for me, the moment that really began my journey. And so where do you go from there? You find out what your moment was that began your journey. For some people, it's birth. For some people, the journey isn't even about science, right? Actually, you're allowed to have multiple stories within a story. That's okay too, right? All of these triangles have one climax, but what kind of life have you really lived if it's only one little exciting part in your life, right? So you're allowed to have stories within your story, but you have to be able to define where that beginning is. And the reason why I particularly like to tell, outside of the fact that people are interested in this particular moment and how I became a scientist, you know, but aside from that fact, the reason why I like to tell the story of the scientist is because that is the mark that I want to leave on the world. The mark that I remember when I was in a sort of some similar to this type of workshop where it was about faculty application packages. And one of the things that the instructor said was, you should write your 5-year plan, but start it at the end, at the part where you're going to be up for tenure, and the tenure committee is going to say, who is this person to the field globally? Who is this person to the field globally at the end of the day? And if I were to speak on that and start to write at the bottom, then I myself am a coronavirus vaccine expert. And how did I get here? What was the exposition? What was the beginning? Who were the characters? Those characters are mentors. Those characters are your family. I actually almost put up a slide from my dissertation acknowledgments where I chose to really mostly acknowledge my friends and my family, because I felt like I wasn't just necessarily getting my PhD for myself, but I was getting my PhD also for them. And how I am as a scientist is really about how I am outside of science, how I am with my friends. And going back to these profiles, sometimes read, and they'll have different characters, right? All of the different characters from my life that I've met. So they'll have friends, and they'll have mentors, and they'll have teachers, etc. And one of the things that kind of always comes back is, oh, Kizzy's the person who always remembers my kid's birthday and sends a gift. Kizzy's a person who organizes this or that. Everybody has the same interaction with me. And as jokingly as my friends like to call me, the Excel spreadsheet queen, it is one of the things that defines how I do science. It defines how I do my day-to-day and how I work. And so as you become that, what you're going to be at the end of the day for the tenure committee or whatever, as you become that person, you'll realize that all of the pieces of your story blend together to make you who you are. And so now we have the beginning. The beginning is actually defined by the end. Notice how I kind of just slipped that in there. And all of the things in between. So before you get to the climax, there is this part of the story that is a straight line, which, oh my God, why do they have it as a straight line? It's called the rise in action. So this is the part where it says the main character faces a series of conflicts. This is the part of the story that in the profiles that are to be written about you online, because they will be, because you are that person, will be left out. This is the part of the story that is the part of the story that you should not allow to necessarily define you, but refine you. And I say that because it seems like if you read my story online, you get, oh, she was smart in elementary school, and then she went to middle school, and then she went to high school, and she joined this program, and she became a scientist. She went to Meyerhoff, she went to UNC, and now she, has 10 patents and whatever. And that's not really what it is. There are so many conflicts, so to speak, along the way. I actually say sometimes jokingly that the reason why I probably feel like science fits me best as a career is because it's so much failure that you, in so many ways, you get used to it and you don't realize how far you've come. You don't realize until you look back that all of those experiments failed. That was a conflict. But it didn't define the outcome necessarily. It refined the outcome because now you know how to control that assay forever. This is the part where you are in graduate school and your project is just, you have no idea. How in the world will you finish this thing in the next 5 years? How in the world is this thing going to end up publishable? This is the part where people die. This is the part where you lose friends. This is the part where you might lose yourself. These are the moments that refine you. They call it a series of conflicts. I was probably reading into that a little bit too hard, but my take on that was that it's kind of a series, right? Conflict after conflict after conflict after conflict after conflict. And that, if you're reading a novel, is what makes the novel interesting. The only reason why you're really tuned in is because somebody is going through. Imagine someone only tuning into your life because of what you've been through. To me, that's scary, right? You know what you've been through. You know all of the things that have refined you. But imagine that being the entirety of your story. That's why I like to say that you have to write it, because these are the things that you are allowed to leave out. I was, for other purposes, reading through some of my graduate school admissions, and, you know, I had like a hardship statement in there because I had a semester where I didn't necessarily do so well. And as I look back, and I'm like, did I really, a Meyerhoff Scholar, NIH Scholar, publications, have to tell these people why I didn't do so well for one semester? No, I didn't. I know that it refined me, but when you put it out there, people can sometimes take it as your definition, how it defines you. And you are allowed to withdraw those conflicts if you shall want to. So where am I now, in my opinion? This is the reason why I gave what I felt like would be the ending of my story first, or, you know, sort of close to the beginning, is because I don't necessarily feel like I'm anywhere close. I'm 34 years old. I'm the scientific lead of a team of, you know, 6 people at the NIH. And I stumbled on what I feel like is one of the climaxes of my life, and a super exciting moment where essentially just by the way that the universe does what the universe does, I ended up in a place where I get to perhaps see a product that I designed be used for the betterment of health for the world. And so that is a highlight of my life. And people might read that on paper and say, there is no way that my highlight is going to be anywhere close to that. Your highlight has to be yours. Your highlight has to be your moment. Your highlight has to be that thing or things, because it doesn't necessarily have to be one, where the definition of the end is put into perspective. So for me, what I said I wanted to be is being put into perspective right now. For many of us on the day-to-day, as we do bench work, as we, you know, analyze large data sets, whatever it is that, however you do your science and however you do your work, that moment is the mutation. That moment is the method that worked. And you're allowed to have so many of those moments that they should not, for one, necessarily compete with anybody else's climax, because their story is their story and your story is your story. But even within your own story, those highlights or those climaxes don't have to compete with each other. And so I get a lot of, what does it feel like to be leading the coronavirus effort for blah, 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 the National Institutes of Health? And it feels like I am supposed to be here. It feels like it is a extremely surreal moment. I haven't really gotten down from it yet. I'm probably so busy that I can't necessarily think about it, but it feels like I'm supposed to be here. It feels like an adrenaline rush that I've been having for the last 6 months. Why am I in this moment? It's because all of that rising action, all of those conflicts, actually, the part of the story that no one really knows is that the team for which I lead was before this moment, mostly comprised of post-bacs. So they were fresh out of undergrad. And we had this space in the back corner of a laboratory where we were doing coronavirus research actually with no trajectory towards clinical trial. So I actually work in a center where it's extremely product driven, which is very different for the NIH, but the point, or I guess the mission of the center, is to move things into phase 1 clinical trials quickly so that companies can then come and pick them up and take them into licensure. So things like the Ebola vaccine is becoming licensed, Ebola antibodies, etc., out of the center that I work in. But when I came to that center for my research, the beginning of my research fellowship, what I wanted was to lay low and to not have to compete internally or externally in the HIV field or the influenza field that was so clouded. And so my boss actually warned me initially. He said, you know, there is no reason for us to take at the time, MERS coronavirus was the coronavirus that was circulating. It actually still is circulating in the Middle East, but at the time that was the coronavirus that was circulating. And he was like, there's no market for it. No company is going to pick this up. So we're not going to take it to phase 1 clinical trial. And I was like, oh, it's okay. I'm going to go be a professor anyway. And I really want to do basic research. I'm actually mostly interested in the seasonal coronaviruses, and I'll just do my little thing in the back of the laboratory and everyone will leave me alone. And that's what really happened, is that he believed in me, so he afforded me a small allocation of his budget to continue to do the coronavirus research. I mean, I had to have a product portfolio outside of coronaviruses in order to really keep my seat. So I do have influenza vaccine concepts that are going into clinical trial, et cetera. But my baby and what I was going to leave the Vaccine Research Center with, so to speak, was coronaviruses. It was underfunded. We didn't even, annual retreats, oftentimes we didn't even have a presentation at the annual retreats because they were all about HIV or influenza or all of these other viruses, Ebola, whatever was hot and sexy at the time. And to me, the reason why I am here telling my story is because I didn't want to be in anyone else's story, so to speak, because I wanted to carve out my scientific niche, because I wanted my research to be different than other people's in the building. Really, the reason why I can be called upon in the Vaccine Research Center as a subject matter expert is because even my boss was like, I'm not, he loves what we do. He loves respiratory viruses in general, but he really kind of left it up to me to see the trajectory of our coronavirus research portfolio as it is today. So here we are, this team of me, my boss, we have a project manager, and a couple of postbacks, and there's an outbreak in China. There's a seafood market that apparently hundreds, dozens of, at that time, people had gotten some rare, unknown respiratory illness at this seafood market. I get a message from my boss on December the 31st when China initially publicized that this was happening in this Wuhan district. And he said, get ready for a fun 2020. It was New Year's Eve. I had no idea what that meant. But when we got back from our holiday breaks, we sat down and he said, we need to decide what we're going to do if this is a coronavirus. Because everything that you've been doing for the last 5 years would mean that we are the people who can answer to this from a vaccine perspective. Actually from an antibody perspective too, but mostly from a vaccine perspective. And we need to decide what we're going to do. And I said, well, if it's a coronavirus and the sequence comes out, we're going to drop, plug and play, as I say in these articles, our mutation for our vaccine concept into that sequence, and we're going to go to phase 1 clinical trial and prove to the world that you can go into phase 1 clinical trial extremely quickly if you're prepared. And that's really all that we wanted to do. The sequence comes out January the 10th. I think that January the 31st was the first US case. Since then, over 14 million people have been infected with this virus. We are currently leading in what they call the vaccine race, whatever, and will probably be one of the first products to go to market if all goes well in our efficacy trials. This is the most exciting part of my story. If I tell it, it sounds like I'm supposed to be here. If I let anyone else tell it, it sounds like they put me here. If I tell it, I'm allowed to remind people that all of this started, 5 years ago when I first was appointed to the Vaccine Research Center. If I let anyone else tell it, oh, we're rushing to clinical trial, although we had notebooks upon notebooks of data proving essentially in animal models that this vaccine concept works and it works well. If I tell it, it's defined by my bosses and my director, the director of the Institute, Dr. Fauci, who's on TV every day. And if I tell it, it's defined by me. And so this is why, as soon as you can, even before you feel like you can grasp it, because I know how it is in these times especially, but even outside of these times, in these years of your life where you don't know what the end of your story will be. Does anyone? But if you can't even if you don't feel like you can define what the end, how you will be defined at the end of the day, you have to begin to write your story. You have to begin to tell it in your words. You have to begin to echo it all the time to everyone who will listen, because one day someone is going to want to hear it. And one day you're going to have to scramble to figure out, what was my beginning? What were the things that defined my rising action and all of the conflict series, so to speak? And if this is my defining moment, then why is it my defining moment and not someone else's? And, you know, it is a hard concept to grasp, actually. At least I feel like it is from my seat, because you think you're just living this life. You think, you know, oh, we have these vaccine concepts and we're gonna just go to clinical trial. You don't necessarily know what is going to happen or how it's going to happen. You don't know what this moment or any of the moments or how any of the experiments that you're doing in the laboratory are going to define science, your field, the world, nature, your life. But you have to start somewhere. You have to begin to jot down your notes on what this moment means to me. So I think I said it a couple of times, but I am 34, which I feel like is old. I'm actually getting gray hair now, so it's like I feel like I'm getting old. But I feel like this is one of the climaxes of my life, and the part that I would define on paper as the end, at the end of the day, you know, leading coronavirus, viral immunology expert, XYZ, at the end of the day. The movement after this climax is also going to define it. You get to this place where you're living in this exciting moment. You know, it is the reader who's reading your story is so into your story, they can't put the book down. But in order to get to the end, there has to be more. There has to be a quote unquote falling action. All of the events that lead to the end of your story. And, you know, we're going to phase 3 and like next week, which is an efficacy trial, and will or will not, but maybe, hopefully, and probably will put the product into the market for general use. Where do you go from that? I'm having people ask me that question, my boss included, and I think it's what a mentor should do. He's like, where do you go from that? What do you, you know, the job that I saw myself doing before this pandemic and before this moment was essentially around building this particular vaccine concept into something that could be deployed later, and that later is today. So where do you go from that? I saw this, and as I was writing my notes, I was like, I get that it's a falling action, and you know, just because they wanted to make this thing a pretty triangle, that it must come down, but like, why does it have to go down? Why can't my end be parallel to my climax? Why can't the trajectory to the end be parallel to my climax, or up? Right? And so how do you, when you get to your climax, or if you feel like you're living in your climax right now in this moment, how do you make sure that your falling action isn't falling at all? And for me, what that means is that I have to step outside of the current moment and revisit where I saw the end to begin. Envision what I envisioned when I was in the laboratory when I was 16 and saw myself as a scientist. Envision what I envisioned when I heard the click in my mind and I said, I'm supposed to be a scientist. To me, I have to step outside of that moment. What was my 5-year plan is as well written as I could have written it for any of my faculty applications. Is probably going to be discovered by the thousands of scientists who are now working on coronaviruses. Redefining what shall be my end, so to speak, based on what is currently happening is something that every single person, no matter how big or small the thing is going to have to do. You're going to have to step outside of your climax and decide, okay, how do I stay here without falling too much? How do I go up from here? And how do I still end up with thousands of other scientists now competing in the field that was mine? How do I still end up with one day at the end of my story being able to say, Kizzmekia Corbett became a scientist when she was 16 years old in North Carolina, and today is the world's leading coronavirus vaccine expert. How do you want to tell your story? You have to decide that sooner than later. You have to decide it with a book beginning and a book end. And you have to pick and choose which of the conflicts you're going to allow to be told. You're going to have to decide how to get to your climax the best that you can, and how to make sure that your falling action isn't falling at all, so that at the end of the day, and I keep saying that because that's exactly how that instructor said it when we had that class about faculty applications, is at the end of the day, so that what you are defined as is exactly who you started out wanting to be, or better. And that's my story.
Dr. Corbett, that was amazing. I wish we had a function to do a standing ovation for you.
Thank you.
Because that is what, I'm glad I had my camera off, because I was just like, that was such an amazing and powerful story. Thank you so much. Ms. Baker, I want to give you an opportunity to also respond.
Similar to you, I'm sitting here and just thinking about when I first met you. And I have an affectionate name for her. Majority of the staff, especially Lamont Tolliver, Kizzy. I am listening to your story it's been an experience for me to hear a story, and in some way I felt a part of it. I felt living in this story. I felt a piece of it, and how your story evolved, especially by being encouraged and inspired by a mentor when you were in high school. And this is something that I always knew was possible, was needed, was important. Just to have someone to say, I trust you, I trust in you, I believe in you, and I know you can go far.
Yes, yes.
And to see that you've gone through this process from the beginning, the middle, and the end, and there are a lot of things in between that could have blocked you, or stopped you, or individuals who could have blocked, and you did not allow that to happen. And so with the Leadership Alliance, I feel your experiences and what you've done and the words that you gave us today is exactly what we say in Leadership Alliance, as being mentors, as providing resources and opportunities. And just thinking about you, Kizzy, over the years, and especially when you were at UMBC, I can't tell you how proud I am. And I know I speak for Dr. Rybowski and the staff and those at UMBC who know you. And we're just extremely proud of what you've done and what you're continuing to do. And I can't wait to read your next book. I'm ready. I want to read this next book.
Yes.
Thank you again so very
Thanks for
much.
having me.
You know, I'm so proud.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Baker. And we also want you to know, on behalf of the Leadership Alliance and of all the participants, we just want to thank you for serving on the front lines battling this epidemic. The work you're doing is going to save lives and have such an impact during this time. So thank you so much. And we also are so glad that you were able to, you know, as Ms. Baker said, tell your story from such a personal perspective. I love it how you kept it real. That is so important.
That was what I was like, when I asked you that question,
Yes.
I was like, to make sure.
That's right. So thank you for keeping it real. I loved how you said you're supposed to be here. I love how you own that, because that is how you are inspiring me, everyone here, future generations. And I love it how you gave us sort of concrete takeaways of how we can tell our own story, that nobody else defines us, that we are the ones who will define us. And your story is so amazing. And now we've got.
I actually have a comment in that regard, because I saw that you all have an imposter syndrome workshop or something after this. And, you know, that's one of the things, I mean, that's defining of the imposter syndrome, is just us not recognizing that we're supposed to be here.
That's right.
For me, it took a while. I still, sometimes I'm a little bit taken aback. I'm just like, wait, why are they asking me this question? Or, but you have to know that, you know, it's not just luck or
That's right.
someone put you here.
That's right.
That you're here because you're supposed to be here.
That's right.
When people ask me, you know, like, how do you feel? And I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to be here. I don't know. Yeah, and so it's hard to really swallow that pill, especially initially, especially when you are in your trainee years, which I still am. And science actually will trick you a lot of times, because it's so much failure on a day-to-day basis. And so it'll trick you to believe that you might not should be here.
That's right.
And so you just have to continue to kind of tell yourself that.
Yeah.
And tell other people too. I said this in a news article. A lot of times when people ask me things, they'll say, well, how is it like working, you know, with Dr. Fauci, for example, or anyone, you know, how was it like breathing in president? And my reply is, I wonder if you were interviewing him, would you be asking him what it's like to work with me?
That's right.
And so start to think about yourself as the person that's supposed to be here. Maybe they are there because of the moment that you created.
That's right. That's right.
And so as much as you can, as difficult as it's so important to do. Dr. Baskis has a story of that, like he used to wake up and call himself doctor, like in the mirror. And so whatever trick that you have to do, you gotta start earlier than later.
Yeah, I love it. And we have some questions. I want to jump into the questions, but before I don't want to forget to say that, you know, if you ever need the Leadership Alliance for anything, we are here for you, and we are here rooting you on and supporting you in the background.
Thank
And so please feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do to support you personally, professionally, whatever. Please feel free to reach out, because you're doing such important work, and we're so glad that you are part of this and taking the lead in this pandemic. So the first question that came up from one of our participants is, what did a day in your life look like before the pandemic?
Different than what it looks like now. Do I even remember? You know, a day in my life before the pandemic looked like anyone else who's doing basic research. I wasn't as hands-on with my on a day-to-day basis, because I do have a team, and lucky enough for that, but you know, still designing experiments and analyzing data and training trainees. I am an early bird, so I would wake up, go to lab, do lab things, and then come home. I mean, I was still kind of really nitty-gritty on a day-to-day, being a basic researcher.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And so I wanted to ask a question from another participant about coronavirus in particular. And the question is about, you know, how are you responding to coronavirus deniers and the rhetoric coming from the White House? And how does that make you feel, given the effort that you and your team are putting in?
So I don't respond to deniers. But if I had words for deniers, you know, one of the things that is humbling mostly in this moment is that I think just by way of being kind of in science since I was 16, I wasn't really aware of just the complete lack of trust around science. How we have failed to communicate it all these years. And most of all, how naysayers or deniers of science don't take fact as fact. And so there is really nothing that you can say factually, even if you were to plaster a graph on the wall or on your forehead and like speak to it. There's really nothing that you can say factually. I think that the best response to anyone who has an opinion that's different to yours is to start in empathy. So you have to find, and I'm starting to do this a lot more, particularly as, you know, the vaccine, you know, as it becomes something that we're thinking about distributing, et cetera. Finding a place where you step outside of your shoes and your position and really say, I'm going to step into your shoes and see what you see. Mm-hmm. And when I started to do that and started to have empathy, it became so much easier to respond when people were saying, you know, oh my God, like Bill Gates is going to take the vaccine and kill people in Africa. And I'm like, where? What? That man, he can't touch the vaccine. You know, like that's the actual fact. But you do have someone who has money and power, who has a history of taking things to Africa that maybe Africa didn't necessarily ask for, but because he feels like they need it. And so seeing that from their position helped me to respond better than you're wrong.
Right.
And so that's my response. I think that generally that responses just have to your response has to be empathy.
Yes, it's like help, trying to understand where they're coming from, and then having a conversation about that so that it's not condescending and it's not, you don't understand this, but it's helping them to understand also the situation. I think that's very powerful. There's another question that came in about your story. And the question is, were there moments in your story where you did not feel as confident that you were doing what you were meant to do? And if so, how did you overcome in those moments?
So to be completely honest, with a lot of the things that are going on in the background, particularly as the next phase of my career shines its light or dims even, as you think about it, really, I feel like I might be living in that now, where I'm having to make really strict decisions about your next, your next move is your best move kind of thing. And where I saw myself, at a, Research One university with a laboratory, 6-7 people, writing my R01s and getting the job done. Could look a lot different now. And so this is one of the moments where I'm like, am I really going in the right direction? Am I like, what does this mean? Because, I'm leading an effort, that is like here from a product development standpoint, and then taking it back down to basic science, particularly when my research plan is being done by the world at this point. I'm really having to readjust what I envision. And so, the best thing to do, and I kind of said this throughout the talk, is that the best thing to do in those moments, and I'm sure there are plenty other ones, I don't even know. If experiments fail, I mean, my Lord, all the things that happen. But the best thing to do in those moments is really to step, you have to step back.
Yeah.
Because those moments actually, I say that, how do I say it? I say that judgment can be clouded by fear.
Yes.
And so you have to remove yourself so that you're not scared to react in those moments. Right. Because that's where you get confusion.
Right. No, that's very powerful. So we're going to have to go in a little bit, but I was just thinking, you're sort of the product of what, Leadership Alliance and Meyerhoff aspires. And in your pathways, are there things that you can help us to really focus on to make sure there are more Dr. Corbett's in the world leading, scientific discovery? So do you have some reflections or thoughts about efforts we could do to increase diversity in the biomedical research workforce?
Oh, Lord, yes. I could write a book on that, tell the story about that, I guess. There are a few elements that if I were to really go back and dissect, I am definitely the product of programs like the Leadership Alliance, right? Starting at 16 with Project Seed, and then it's Meyerhoff and NIH undergraduate scholarship program, and programs with this kind of mission to increase diversity and underrepresented minorities in the sciences. The main thing that sticks with me is the family aspect, and that you're not dumped into a program with people from all over the country that you don't know, but in so many ways we were forced to bond. Yeah. I mean, I'm in my roommate's weddings and all of these things, and I get text messages from Meyerhoff's you know, at this point, checking on me probably as much as I get from my family. Dr. Rabowski has always served like a dad. When you have that kind of aspect engraved or embedded into your program, it creates an atmosphere where, at least how my household was when I grew up, I mean, I'm one of 7 children, you know, very close-knit family. When one of us got in trouble, we all got grounded. And it wasn't like you had, all of our grades, even if my brother brought home a C, we all got a C. And so nobody got paid for the report card because one person in this house got a C. And so it creates a level of accountability where for the good and the bad, you know, you're rewarded together and you're also in so many ways punished so much together. And so that's the number one aspect that really sticks with me. And that same way I said about my PhD dissertation seminar, I didn't feel like I was getting a PhD for myself. I felt like I was getting a PhD for my village, for everyone. And all of these moments I feel like are not for me. All of these moments are a reflection of like, yeah, like Kizzmekia did all of these things to get to this place, but also it was fueled by these programs that did all of these things to get Kizzmekia to this place. And so I think that that's a key aspect. I think that mentorship is a key aspect. And, you know, not like you go find a Nobel laureate and you're in their lab and that's your mentor, or you should be mentored by your mentees even. So my mentees and I have checkups where they tell me what I'm doing wrong. And that's just helping me to build how I mentor them. And then also the giants, right, of the field can also serve as mentors. But I tell people all the time, they can only be helpful to you if they really see your end, like the end of your story, the way that you see it. If someone is mentoring me and they do not see me as a coronavirus vaccine expert, a leading coronavirus vaccine expert at the end of my trajectory, then there's no way they can tell me anything about how to get there if they don't truly see that. And so, and it's very okay to ask. When sometimes these programs will, you know, they'll have these embedded mentorship mentee programs, but they're not necessarily asking that question of the mentors. Is the person that you're mentoring, like, can we just check in and see if the person that you're mentoring, like, do you see them as, and like, you know, there just needs to be some dialogue around that. Those are really kind of the key aspects. And then to be quite frank, this is as frank as I can be, but resources financially matter, okay? I can put like a spreadsheet together or whatever, but even just like the smallest things, like the reason why I applied to certain schools in graduate school is because there were applications like vouchers or whatever. And so resources matter because the people that we as underrepresented minorities are competing with are resourced. So it just, at the end of the day, it just matters. Actually, speaking about what is happening right now with my life, if I didn't work in a lab with some level of funding that was dispensable to the point where my PI could say, okay, whatever, take this much money and go back there in your corner like you want to and do your thing, then we wouldn't even be here. And so those are kind of the 3 really big aspects that I see.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking time. We're a little bit behind schedule, but the conversation has been so great. We have a couple of questions that, you know, if you have the time, we can send them to you and we can have you, you know, respond to them. on a Google Doc so we can share it with our participants. But we want you to know that we hope you feel part of the Leadership Alliance family. And
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, if there's anything that we can do, we are more than happy to support everything you're doing. I agree with Ms. Baker. We are so proud of all that you have accomplished and all that you will accomplish. I want to thank all of our participants for joining this morning. Up next, we've got afternoon workshops, Design Your Career, using life design to unmask and demystify the imposter syndrome, becoming a resilient scientist during challenging and uncertain times, virtual interviewing, building a professional online brand. All of the links are in the agenda, and so we look forward to continuing to have these professional development conversations with you throughout the day. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Ms. Baker, for joining us.
You're welcome.
And yeah, enjoy the rest of the career development workshop. Thank you.
Bye, Kizzy.